Lawmakers have just one day left to prevent a government shutdown. Congress could take action on a short-term funding bill as early as tonight, with sources telling CBS News they are close to reaching an agreement. But that would still leave a nearing debt ceiling crisis. Originally, Democrats tried to link the two, but Republicans voted against that Monday. They say they won't help Democrats raise the debt limit, despite doing so 3 times under former President Trump. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says lawmakers must extend the government's ability to borrow money no later than October 18th. Otherwise, the country could fully default on its debts for the first time in history, triggering a potential recession and financial crisis. The president's 2 major legislative priorities are also in jeopardy. President Biden called off a trip to promote vaccine mandates in Chicago. He's staying in Washington to continue working to save his Build Back Better plan and the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Our objective here is winning 2 votes, getting these 2 pieces of important legislation across the finish line, because we know the impact they'll have on the American people. We know they'll lower costs for people. We know they will make be a huge down payment toward addressing our climate crisis. They'll lower taxes for 50 million Americans, and he wants to get both done. We certainly trust Speaker Pelosi. We're working in lockstep and around the clock to get both of these pieces of legislation done.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is expected to hold a vote on infrastructure tomorrow after an agreement fell apart to pass the 2 bills together. Progressives are threatening to sink the vote. They want a commitment their priorities will be met in the larger social and climate spending bill. Democratic moderates say $3.5 trillion over 10 years is too costly. Speaker Pelosi is now signaling the vote could be delayed.
Well, the Speaker has that authority, yes, but I want it to pass. So what we want it to do is to pass tomorrow. And anything that strengthens the hand of the Speaker helps pass the bill.
Let's bring in Skyler Henry, Meridith, McGraw, and Eugene Scott. Skyler covers Congress and the White House for CBS News. Meridith is a national political correspondent for Politico. And Eugene is a national political reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome. It is good to have you all. Meridith, the clock is ticking, as they say. Let's talk about this time frame. So how much time would a temporary funding bill by Congress, and what are the odds looking like for passage?
Well, right now, there are 3 major issues that are sitting in front of Congress. That's the debt ceiling, that's infrastructure, and that's this reconciliation. But the government is going to run out of funding. And right now, it seems like one of the few things that is clear at the moment is that there is a bipartisan effort to pass some sort of measure that will at least be a temporary stopgap to prevent any sort of government shutdown. Now, that's only temporary. They only have 19, that's only temporary. That'll last them until, I believe, December 3rd. And I might have to correct myself, but it won't take them too long, but it will at least prevent a looming government shutdown.
And Eugene, there's also that multi-trillion-dollar social spending bill. Why are Democratic leaders ruling out including the debt ceiling in that?
Well, there are some Democrats who obviously do not agree with everything that is in the bill. More conservative ones are concerned about, the spending being too significant. But there are also other Democrats, those who are more on the left, who believe they should be separate and that they don't need to be tied. There's also debate about whether or not it's even necessary to, have all of the support, or not all of the support, but some support from the right to even increase the debt ceiling. And so there are various philosophies and worldviews within the Democratic Party on what is best and what needs to be done to get to the next step to pass the agenda that they've said they want to move forward.
Well, Skyler, the White House says that the president canceled a planned trip to Chicago so he could focus on negotiations. I mean, that's pretty unusual to have something like that take place. But what can you tell us about who President Biden has been meeting with?
Well, I think that certainly speaks to the gravity of the moment, right? With hours away from a potential government shutdown, we know what Democrats want to do in terms of making sure that they get these two massive spending bills off the ground. And so I think the White House thought best to keep the president here. The president focused on trying to reach out to some of the more moderate members of his party, particularly Senators Manchin and Sinema, who met with the president yesterday, again meeting with the president again today to talk about ways to move forward and actually to get them to sort of buy into all of this. But as Eugene mentioned, there's still some hesitation in terms of what that all exactly looks like. And then you have this new wrinkle into the mix of more progressives speaking out, namely Senator Bernie Sanders yesterday, who said that he does not want members of the House in the Democratic Party, probably those who are in the more progressive side of the party, to vote for that infrastructure bill if it does come up to a vote tomorrow, because what he understood of the bill, at least how it was going to be rolled out earlier this year, remember it passed in the Senate, isn't what is being the case now. And so there are all of these different variables that the White House and some of the senior Democrats have to deal with now, so much so that we know that Senators Schumer and Speaker Pelosi are going to be meeting with the president this evening to further those talks as well. But again, it speaks to the crunch time. It speaks to what's going on here as Democrats try to make sure that two of the tentpole items in the president's legislative agenda move forward.
And Meridith, to follow up on what Skyler was saying there, I mean, where does this leave House Speaker Nancy Pelosi? She continues to struggle with more liberal Democrats. As of this morning, about half of the Progressive Caucus said that they will not vote for the infrastructure bill that Pelosi had planned to bring for a vote Thursday. So what is the next move for the Speaker?
Well, Speaker Pelosi is in a very tricky position right now. She's trying to appease progressives in her caucus who have been very clear, very adamant that they want to see the legislative language for this $3 trillion bill that they want to push through with a complicated process via reconciliation. But she's also, of course, trying to show moderates that she's willing to work with them and try to show that, she hears them, and she really doesn't have much to lose here. She only has 3 votes to potentially lose, not much wiggle room for her at the moment. And she's also made clear, though, in what she's been saying publicly by mentioning President Biden a lot, that he plays a role in all of this as well. This is part of his legislative legacy. And so in some ways, she's punted a little bit to him to try to encourage him to use some of his leadership to help push this forward. But she's in a really tricky position. And I think one thing, too, that's interesting is, she does have a lot of power here. If she wants to delay a vote, she certainly can do that. But with any sort of big political priority like this reconciliation bill or infrastructure, time is really of the essence. And with midterm elections just 1 year away, there's a lot of really tricky political gymnastics that she's going to have to do to get all of this done.
Tricky indeed. Well, Skyler, Democrats were again told no after asking the Senate parliamentarian to include immigration reform in the budget process. What was different about their ask this time around?
Well, it's certainly a big blow for Democrats. This time around in their plan is circling around what's referred to as the registry. And what that is a set date that is picked out that would essentially allow immigrants in the U.S. to be green card eligible. They would set a date. The current one is at 1972, so it's relatively obsolete. But again, the parliamentarian told them no. The earlier plan included undocumented immigrants who were either here as children or temporary humanitarian status, farm workers, or other pandemic essential workers as well. But again, this all has to be tied to the budget if Democrats wanted to use the reconciliation process. But the Senate parliamentarian essentially said, no, they can't do that. So now Democrats say that they will continue to find another way. We know Republicans have been rallying against this measure. It impacts some 8 million, if not more, immigrants here in the U.S. And so I think it'll be interesting to see if Democrats try to tie this into the spending bill in another way, if that'll continue to be blocked, or if they'll have to create a whole separate measure in its entirety to try to make sure that things on their immigration agenda get addressed.
Well, Eugene, let's talk about police reform. Senator Tim Scott, the lead Republican negotiator, says that Democrats pushing to defund the police derailed the talks. But as I understand it, that's not how some others are describing what happened. Who exactly is pushing back on Senator Scott's claim?
Well, multiple Democrats as well as police unions. There were Democrats who were hoping to tie some federal funding to various police departments putting in place policies that they believed could prevent so much of the tragic violence we had seen, in the past few years. Something like chokeholds, also knocking on doors before entering into apartments. But that is not something that the Republicans would agree to, and they called it de facto defunding of the police. And police unions pushed back on that, saying that actually that wasn't on the table. That wasn't the language that was used at all. Democrats were not trying to defund police departments, but put in place policies that could make police more accountable to the citizens that they serve.
All right, to be continued. Skyler Henry, Meridith, McGraw, and Eugene Scott, thank you all very much.